The auditorium of the small-town music school buzzed with the sounds of chatter, laughter, and the soft tapping of shoes on the polished wooden floor. It was the school's annual open day, a time when parents, students, and visitors came together to celebrate music, talent, and passion. The air smelled faintly of old varnish and fresh flowers placed near the stage. Everyone seemed to know each other, and conversations filled every corner of the hall. Amid the cheerful chaos, a quiet woman stood near the back of the room. She wore a simple beige sweater, slightly worn at the sleeves, and her hands were folded nervously in front of her. Her hair was tied back neatly, and a few strands framed her tired but gentle face. She looked like someone who had come to watch, not to perform. A few teachers noticed her standing alone and smiled politely, assuming she was just another parent or maybe a cleaner who had wandered in early. When the host announced that the school would now open the stage for anyone who wanted to try playing the grand piano, there was a brief hush. Most people looked toward the rows of students sitting in the front, expecting one of the young pianists to volunteer. But the students exchanged shy glances, hesitant to play in front of their teachers and families. Then from the back of the hall, the quiet woman slowly raised her hand. For a moment, everyone thought she was joking. The teachers looked at one another, puzzled. "You'd like to play?" the host asked with a surprised smile. The woman nodded gently. Her voice was soft but steady when she said, "If that's all right." A ripple of laughter passed through the crowd, not cruel, but doubtful, the kind of laughter that comes when people expect something awkward to happen. The teachers exchanged polite smiles, one even whispering, "Maybe she just wants to have fun." The woman didn't seem to notice, or perhaps chose not to. She began walking toward the stage, her steps slow but certain. As she approached the grand piano, some of the students giggled quietly. She didn't have the look of a performer. Her clothes were plain, her shoes old, and her movements humble. Yet there was something calm about her, something grounded. She didn't hurry, didn't fidget. She simply moved with quiet assurance, as though she belonged there even if no one else thought she did. When she reached the stage, she paused for a moment to look at the piano. It was a magnificent instrument, glossy black shining under the warm stage lights. Her fingers trembled slightly as she reached out to touch the edge of it. The texture of the wood seemed to awaken a distant memory, one buried under years of routine and responsibility. She pulled out the bench and sat down carefully, adjusting her posture with the familiarity of someone who had done this many times before. The room grew restless. The teachers whispered to one another. A few people in the back began recording on their phones, thinking it might be amusing later. "She's probably going to play a children's song," someone muttered, and a few chuckles followed. But the woman didn't seem to hear them. Her eyes were fixed on the piano keys. For a long moment, she just sat there, still and silent. It was as if she was taking in the feeling of being close to music again. Her fingers hovered above the keys, unsure at first, then slowly finding their place. The room grew quieter, waiting for something to happen. Then softly she pressed a single note. It rang through the air like a small bell, clear and tender. A few people shifted in their seats. She played another note, then another, testing the sound, adjusting her rhythm. Her touch was gentle, her hands moving with patience and purpose. And then she began to play. At first the melody was simple, soft, delicate, almost hesitant. But within seconds something shifted. Her hands moved faster, more confidently, weaving together notes that filled the hall with warmth and emotion. The laughter that had filled the room only moments ago vanished. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Every eye was on her. The teachers leaned forward, their expressions changing from amusement to astonishment. The students, who had been whispering to each other a few minutes earlier, now sat frozen in silence. No one expected this sound, and not from her. The music she played wasn't just technical. It was alive. It carried a quiet strength, a story in every chord. Each note seemed to come from a place of memory, of love, of loss. Her fingers danced across the keys with the grace of someone who knew them deeply. There was no hesitation now, only flow, pure, natural flow. It was the kind of playing that didn't come from training alone, but from a lifetime of feeling. Her eyes were half closed, her face calm, lost in the world she was creating. For those few minutes, the entire hall forgot who she was. They forgot the laughter, the doubts, the whispers. They only heard the music, rich, emotional, and alive. When she reached the final note, it hung in the air for a long, trembling moment before fading into silence. She didn't move right away. She simply sat there, breathing softly, her hands resting on the keys as if she didn't want to let go. No one clapped at first. Not because they didn't want to, but because they couldn't. They were stunned, they caught between disbelief and awe. Then slowly the applause began. It started with one person, then another, until the whole hall was on its feet. The teachers who had been laughing moments earlier were now standing too, clapping harder than anyone else. The woman finally looked up, her eyes glistening slightly. She gave a small, almost shy smile and nodded in gratitude. The host stepped forward, clearly moved, and said softly, "That was incredible. May we know your name?" She hesitated for a moment before answering. "Just call me Lena," she said quietly. People in the audience began murmuring, some saying they had never heard anything like it, others wondering how someone like her could play so beautifully. But Lena didn't explain herself. She simply stood up, gave a polite bow, and walked off the stage as quietly as she had come. In the back of the hall, a young teacher whispered to another, "Did you see her hands? The way she used the pedal? That's not a beginner. She's played for years." The older teacher beside him nodded slowly, still clapping long after Lena had disappeared behind the curtain. The rest of the day went on, but the atmosphere had changed. Every performance that followed seemed dull compared to what they had just witnessed. Students tried their best, teachers offered kind words, but everyone's mind kept going back to that ordinary woman in the beige sweater who had played like a master. Outside the hall, Lena stood for a moment in the cool air, listening to the faint sounds of music still coming from inside. She pulled her sweater a little tighter around her shoulders and smiled to herself. She hadn't planned to perform that day. She had only come to watch, to feel close to the world she once belonged to. But when she saw the piano sitting there gleaming under the lights, she couldn't resist. Something deep inside her had called out, the part of her that had once lived for music before life took her elsewhere. She didn't need the applause, the recognition, or the attention. What mattered was that, for a few precious minutes, she had played again, not for anyone else, but for herself. Inside, the teachers were still talking about her performance, wondering who she was and where she had learned to play like that. Some thought she might be a retired musician. Others assumed she had studied long ago. But no one knew for sure. All they knew was that something special had happened, something they couldn't quite explain. As Lena walked down the quiet street away from the school, the sound of her own music still echoed in her mind. For the first time in many years, she felt light, almost young again. Her fingers tingled as though they still carried the vibration of the keys, and even though no one knew her story yet, she knew this was only the beginning of something unexpected, a moment that would quietly ripple far beyond that small auditorium. In the days that followed, people in town would keep talking about her performance. Someone had recorded it and posted it online, and slowly it began to spread. But for now, she was just a woman walking home under the soft glow of the streetlights, humming a melody that had always lived within her, waiting for the right moment to be heard again. The following morning, the music school was unusually alive with whispers. Students gathered in small circles talking about what had happened the day before. The video of the mysterious woman's performance had already started spreading among them, shared from one phone to another. In each version, the story changed a little. Some said she used to be a famous pianist, others claimed she was a hidden teacher testing the staff. Nobody really knew who she was, but everyone agreed on one thing: her music was something they wouldn't forget. Inside the teacher's office, the atmosphere was equally restless. The head instructor sat at his desk, replaying the same video on his tablet, eyes narrowed in concentration. The sound of those notes still lingered in his mind. That was not an amateur, he muttered to himself, rewinding the clip again. The younger teachers were still trying to process what they'd seen. One of them, still embarrassed about laughing during her walk to the stage, spoke softly. She made it look effortless. You could tell she wasn't just playing the notes. She felt them. Outside, the hall where she had performed was quiet again. The chairs were stacked and the grand piano sat untouched under its cover. Yet somehow it felt different now, as if her music had left a trace in the air, a memory that refused to fade. Later that afternoon, the school's receptionist received a call. The voice on the other end was calm and polite. "Hello, I believe I left my scarf there yesterday," the caller said. It was the same woman. The receptionist quickly recognized her voice and asked her to stop by any time to collect it. The news spread instantly. The mysterious pianist was coming back. When she arrived, she carried herself with the same quiet grace as before. She thanked the receptionist and reached for her scarf, a simple wool one with faded edges. Before she could leave, the head instructor came out of his office. "Excuse me," he said kindly. "You played yesterday, didn't you?" She nodded, slightly surprised but not nervous. "Yes, I didn't mean to interrupt anything. I just missed the sound of a piano." He smiled a little awkwardly. "You didn't interrupt. You left us speechless. May I ask, where did you learn to play like that?" For a brief moment she seemed unsure how to answer. Her eyes lowered, and her fingers brushed against the scarf as though thinking through memories. "A long time ago," she said softly. "I studied for a while when I was young. But life changed." The teacher hesitated. He could tell there was more to her story, but he didn't want to pry. "Would you consider coming again? Maybe give a small performance for the students? They were inspired by you." She shook her head with a gentle smile. "Oh no, I'm no performer anymore. I only played yesterday because I couldn't resist. I didn't think anyone would even listen." Before he could convince her otherwise, she thanked him and left. Watching her walk away, he felt a strange mix of respect and regret. Something about her humility made her brilliance even more striking. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, she walked home along quiet streets. Her apartment was small but warm, filled with little signs of a modest life. A stack of old books, a worn-out sofa, and a faded photograph of a younger version of herself standing beside a piano. She looked at it for a long while before setting it back on the table. The piano in that picture wasn't just an instrument. It was a piece of her past, one she had locked away years ago. Back when she was in her 20s, she had been a promising student at a well-known conservatory. Her instructors used to say she had a gift, not just technical skill but rare emotion. Music had been her world. She would practice until late at night, losing herself in the melodies. There were even talks about her joining a touring ensemble. But then everything changed when her father fell ill. She had to return home to care for her family. Her savings vanished quickly, and the dream she had once chased slipped out of reach. She found work cleaning offices, later in a school cafeteria, always telling herself it was temporary, but days turned into years. Every time she walked past a piano shop or heard someone playing, her heart ached quietly, though she never showed it. She told herself music belonged to another version of her, the one who had time to dream. Now, as she sat by the small window of her apartment, she remembered the feeling of those keys beneath her fingers. It wasn't about proving anything to anyone. It was about remembering who she was. That day at the school had awakened something inside her that she thought was gone forever. Meanwhile, back at the music school, the staff decided to search for her. The head instructor called a few of his old colleagues, describing her performance. One of them thought he recognized the name when he mentioned Lena. "There used to be a girl by that name at the conservatory," the man said slowly. "A real talent. She disappeared from the program after her second year. Some said she had family troubles. Could it be the same person?" The instructor's curiosity deepened. He couldn't stop thinking about how effortlessly she had played. It wasn't the kind of skill one could fake. He asked the receptionist for her contact number, but she had only left her first name. That mystery only made her story more compelling. The following week, the video of her playing had gathered thousands of views online. People commented that it was the most emotional piano piece they had ever heard. Some said they cried without knowing why. A few music lovers tried to identify the song, but no one could find it. She had improvised the entire piece. It came straight from her heart. One morning, Lena received a call from a number she didn't recognize. The voice on the line was cheerful. "Hello, is this Lena? I'm from the music school. The students haven't stopped talking about your performance. We'd love for you to come back and maybe teach a short workshop. Just for a day." She hesitated. "Teach?" she repeated softly. "Oh, I don't know about that. I haven't taught anyone in years. You don't have to prepare anything formal," the woman assured her. "They just want to hear from you, how you play, how you feel music. You've inspired them more than you realize." That evening, she sat with a cup of tea thinking about the offer. The thought of stepping back into a school setting both frightened and thrilled her. She imagined herself standing before a group of young faces, eager and full of dreams. She remembered being that age, hopeful, unaware of how fragile those dreams could be. She placed her cup down and went to the corner of her living room. There stood a small, old upright piano, out of tune and covered with a light layer of dust. She ran her fingers over the keys. The sound was imperfect, but it still spoke to her. She smiled faintly. Maybe it was time to play again, not for applause, not for recognition, but to remind others that music comes from living, from everything one endures and survives. The next morning, she called the school and agreed to visit. When she arrived, students were already gathered in the practice hall, whispering excitedly. The teachers greeted her warmly, this time without a hint of laughter. They introduced her to the students, who looked at her with admiration. She sat at the piano once more, the same one she had played before. "I don't have a lesson plan," she said with a smile. "I just want you to listen first." Then she began to play again, slower this time, explaining how each note wasn't just a sound but a feeling. She told them about breathing with the rhythm, about listening to silence between notes, about letting the heart lead before the hands. By the time she finished, some students had tears in their eyes. They realized that music wasn't only about speed or perfection. It was about emotion, something they had never truly understood until that moment. When she stood to leave, the room filled with applause once more. The head instructor thanked her sincerely. "You've given them something no textbook could ever teach," he said. Lena smiled softly. "Music gives back when you give it your heart," she replied. That night, as she walked home again, she felt lighter. The world seemed a little brighter, the air a little warmer. She knew her life wouldn't suddenly change overnight, but something inside her already had. She had rediscovered the part of herself she thought was lost forever. And though she didn't know it yet, that one decision to play on an ordinary afternoon would soon lead to a turning point that neither she nor the school could have imagined. Days turned into a week, and the story of the woman's unexpected performance continued to spread far beyond the walls of the small-town music school. People who had never stepped foot inside the place were now walking in, asking if the teachers knew her name or if she would be playing again. The video had traveled across the internet, and though it wasn't a viral sensation by global standards, it had reached hearts everywhere it touched. Viewers wrote comments about how her music made them cry, how they felt something real again. Inside the school, her quiet influence began to change the students. Before that day, most of them played to impress their teachers or compete with one another. But after hearing her, something softened. They started to play slower, listening to their instruments in a new way, trying to find the feeling in the music rather than just perfection. The head instructor noticed it too. "They're finally understanding that music isn't a race," he said to one of his colleagues during a class break. "It's almost as if her spirit stayed behind with them." Meanwhile, the woman, Lena, returned to her usual life. Every morning, she walked to her job at a small office downtown, sorting papers and answering calls. No one there knew about her connection to music. During lunch breaks, she sometimes sat by the park, closing her eyes and listening to the distant hum of city sounds. Even the rumble of buses and footsteps of strangers seemed to carry a rhythm she could recognize. Still, a small part of her heart ached. Playing again had awakened something deep within her, and now it refused to stay silent. Every night she found herself sitting by her old upright piano at home. It was missing a few keys, slightly out of tune, but it didn't matter. The music she played filled her small apartment with warmth. Sometimes she played for hours, forgetting the time. She didn't think of herself as a performer anymore, just someone trying to speak in the only language she truly knew. One evening, as she played softly, there was a knock at her door. When she opened it, she found one of the teachers from the music school standing there with a gentle smile. "I'm sorry to come unannounced," he said quickly, "but I had to see you. We've all been wondering if you'd consider joining us again, maybe as a part-time mentor." Lena looked surprised. "A mentor?" she repeated, not sure what to say. He nodded. "You don't have to teach in the formal sense. The students just want to learn how you make music feel alive. The truth is, none of us can teach that. You reminded everyone what real music sounds like." She hesitated, unsure if she was ready to step into that world again. but she saw sincerity in his eyes and felt something stir inside her. Not pride, but purpose. "I'll think about it," she said quietly. That night she couldn't sleep. The idea of teaching frightened her. What if she wasn't good enough anymore? What if her way of feeling music didn't make sense to others? Yet another thought tugged at her. What if this was her chance to give back what life had taken from her? A few days later, she walked back into the music school. The air was filled with the sound of pianos, violins, and laughter. She stood in the doorway for a moment, watching students practice. A few recognized her and whispered excitedly. The head instructor greeted her warmly. "I'm glad you came," he said. "We've set up a small class for you. Nothing formal, just a group of students who want to learn from your heart." She smiled nervously. "All right," she said softly. That afternoon, she sat at the same grand piano she had played before. Around her were 6 students, their faces eager and full of curiosity. "I don't have much to teach you," she began. "But I can show you how I hear music. Close your eyes." The students obeyed, sitting still as the first notes filled the room. She played something gentle, like a lullaby from another time. "What do you feel?" she asked. One student whispered, "It sounds sad but also peaceful." Another said, "It feels like remembering something you loved." She smiled. "Exactly. That's what music is, emotion turned into sound. It's not about being perfect. It's about being honest." Her class continued for over an hour, though no one noticed the time. When she finally stopped, the room was silent. One of the students said softly, "Can we come back tomorrow?" She laughed quietly, her heart lighter than it had been in years. "Of course," she said. As days passed, more students began to join her in formal lessons. Word spread that her classes were different, not about scales or exams, but about feeling. The teachers watched from a distance, amazed at how even the most distracted students now practiced with a new kind of focus. The music school started to change, not through competition but through connection. One afternoon, the head instructor invited her to his office. "You've brought something back that we lost," he said sincerely. "Would you consider helping us full-time? You've reminded everyone why they fell in love with music in the first place." She looked out the window for a long moment. "I never thought I'd find my way back here," she said quietly. "But maybe this is where I was meant to be all along." He smiled. "Sometimes life takes us in circles just to bring us home again." That evening, she stayed at the school long after the classes ended. The hall was empty except for the piano and the echo of faint footsteps. She sat down and began to play alone. The melody that came out was different this time, softer, warmer, full of gratitude. It was the sound of a woman rediscovering herself, not through fame or applause, but through quiet purpose. As the final notes faded, she looked up to see a few students standing by the door. They had stayed behind just to listen, one of them whispered. "That's the sound of home." Lena smiled and nodded. "Yes," she said softly. "That's exactly what it is." When she left the building that night, the stars were bright above the empty streets. For years she had walked under the same sky, thinking her dreams were long gone. But now she understood something simple yet powerful. It was never too late to start again. Music had never left her. It had only waited patiently for her to return. And though she didn't know what the future would bring, she knew one thing for sure. The laughter that once greeted her at that piano had turned into admiration. She had gone from being a mystery to a mentor, from a forgotten dreamer to a quiet force that changed everyone around her. In that transformation, she found peace. For the first time in decades, her heart and her music moved in harmony once again. Autumn arrived quietly in the small town, covering the streets in golden leaves and cool air. The music school was livelier than ever. Students now filled the hallways even after classes ended, practicing with a new kind of energy. The sound of pianos, violins, and flutes blended together like a constant heartbeat that pulsed through the building. At the center of it all was Lena. Since she began teaching, even part-time, things had changed for everyone. Her classes were never about rules or pressure. She talked about stories, about emotion, about how music should feel like a conversation with your soul. The students adored her because she treated them as equals, not as learners to be corrected, but as musicians with their own voices. She had a way of making each one believe that they mattered, even the shy ones who barely dared to touch the keys. The head instructor often stood outside her class just to listen. He would hear laughter one minute and complete silence the next as the students lost themselves in the melodies she guided them through. He once told another teacher, "She doesn't just teach notes, she teaches life." One evening after her last class, Lena sat alone at the grand piano. The school was quiet now, the sunlight fading through the large windows. Her hands rested gently on the keys, but she didn't play right away. She just sat there thinking. It had been months since that first day when everyone laughed as she walked to this very piano. Now they clapped every time she finished playing. But even so, she couldn't shake the feeling that something inside her was unfinished. There was a dream she had never fully lived. Performing again, not just for students, but for herself. The thought scared her. She wasn't young anymore, and her hands sometimes trembled when she played too long. Still, the desire grew stronger each day. One weekend, the school announced a special winter concert, inviting all teachers and advanced students to perform. It would be open to the public, a celebration of music and growth. The head instructor approached Lena gently about it. "You should play," he said. "Everyone would love to hear you again." She smiled faintly and shook her head. "It's been too long. Let the students have their moment." But he didn't give up easily. "They'll have their moment. But they learn from you, and they want to see you perform. It would mean more than you think." That night, she sat by her piano at home, replaying his words in her mind. Her small apartment was quiet except for the ticking of a clock and the faint hum of the city outside. She placed her fingers on the keys and began to play softly. The sound filled the room, wrapping her in warmth and sadness. She closed her eyes, remembering the girl she once was, the one who dreamed of standing on big stages, who practiced until dawn, who believed that music could change everything. Tears slipped down her cheeks, not from regret but from gratitude. After all these years, she was still able to play. The music had never left her. She looked down at her hands, aged but steady. "Maybe one more time," she whispered to herself. The next morning, she walked into the school early before anyone else arrived. The janitor was sweeping the floor when she entered the hall. "You're here early," he said kindly. She smiled. "Just wanted to practice a little." She sat at the piano, the one that had changed everything, and began to rehearse. For hours, she played pieces from her past, fragments of classical music mixed with her own improvisations. Every note carried a memory, every pause a heartbeat. The janitor stopped sweeping just to listen. Even without an audience, she played as if the whole world was listening. Over the next few weeks, the students noticed her staying later after class. She didn't say what she was preparing, but they suspected. Rumors spread that she would perform at the winter concert, and excitement filled the school. When the day finally arrived, the hall was packed. Families, teachers, and townspeople filled the seats. The air buzzed with anticipation. One by one, the students performed, some nervous, some confident, and each performance ended with applause and proud smiles. Lena sat backstage, her hands resting in her lap, her heart beating faster than it had in years. She could hear the muffled sounds of the piano through the curtain, and every note brought back a flood of emotions. For a moment, she wondered if she should back out. Maybe the world didn't need to hear her anymore. Maybe her time had passed. Then she heard one of her students on stage, a young girl who used to doubt herself. The girl played beautifully, her music full of emotion. When she finished, the audience erupted in applause. Lena smiled through tears. That was when she knew she couldn't hide anymore. When her name was announced, the audience gasped in surprise. Many had come hoping she would perform, but no one was sure she actually would. She stepped onto the stage slowly, the same way she had that first day. Except this time, no one laughed. The room was silent, filled with respect. She took her seat at the piano, closed her eyes, and began to play. The first few notes floated gently into the air, soft and trembling like the beginning of a story. Then, as she found her rhythm, the music grew stronger. It was not just a performance, but it was a lifetime poured into sound. Every emotion she had ever felt, joy, sorrow, loss, hope, found its way into the melody. The audience was silent, completely drawn into her world. The teachers stood in the back, watching in awe. Some had tears in their eyes. Halfway through, the melody shifted into something no one recognized. It wasn't a classical piece. It was her own creation, the same one she had played the first day she sat at that piano when everyone had laughed. But this time it was fuller, deeper, more alive. As the final note rang out, there was a moment of perfect silence. Then the hall erupted into applause. The sound filled every corner of the room. People stood, clapping until their hands hurt. Some called out her name, others simply wept. Lena stood and bowed, her eyes glistening. She had not played for fame, but for freedom. For the first time in decades, she felt whole again. After the concert, the head instructor approached her backstage. "You moved everyone tonight," he said softly. "That was more than music, that was truth." She smiled, her voice quiet but firm. "It's strange," she said. "I thought I had lost this part of myself, but I realize now it was always there, waiting." That night, as she walked home through the cold air, snow began to fall softly around her. The streetlights glowed through the flakes, and she felt a calm peace settle inside her. For the first time in years, she wasn't looking back anymore. She knew there were still hard days ahead, that life would never be perfect. But she also knew that as long as she had music, she would never truly be lost again. In the weeks that followed, the video of her concert spread even wider than the first one. People from all over commented about how they could feel her story through her music, even without knowing her name. At the school, her students practiced harder, inspired by her courage. They didn't see her as just a teacher anymore. She was living proof that dreams never really die. They just wait for the right moment to return. And in that little town, people spoke about her performance for months. Some said it was the most beautiful thing they had ever heard. Others said it reminded them that it's never too late to begin again. Lena never thought of herself as special. She was just a woman who once loved music, lost it for a while and found it again. But to everyone who heard her play, she became something more. A reminder that sometimes, brilliance hides behind the quietest hearts, waiting patiently for its time to shine once more. Winter passed, and by the time spring sunlight began warming the town again, life at the music school had transformed. The concert Lena performed in had become a memory people still spoke about with emotion. Her name had spread through nearby towns, not because she sought attention, but because people who saw her performance couldn't stop sharing what they had witnessed. In the weeks following that night, students began asking for more of her time. Parents came to the school to thank her personally, saying that their children now practiced with purpose instead of pressure. Even those who had once looked down on her now spoke with admiration. It was as if the entire community had woken up to something beautiful that had been there all along. A reminder that art and kindness could change hearts more than pride or competition ever could. But Lena remained humble. She still walked to the school each morning with her simple coat and old bag, greeting the janitor and smiling at the students who waved to her from the hallways. To her, nothing had changed. She was still the same woman who loved music quietly, who believed that every song carried a story worth telling. Still, something new stirred inside her. Her performance had reopened a part of her heart she thought was gone forever. For the first time in years, she began composing again, not for anyone else but for herself. In the evenings, after finishing her lessons, she would sit at her piano at home, sketching melodies that felt like memories stitched into sound. Some pieces were gentle, others full of longing, but all carried a deep honesty that came only from lived experience. Her students often stayed late, listening from outside her door. They said her music didn't sound like anyone else's. It sounded like life itself. The school's head instructor eventually asked her if she would consider recording her compositions. People should hear them, he insisted. They deserve to be remembered. Lena hesitated. I never thought about that, she said softly. I don't even have proper equipment. He smiled. We'll handle that. Just keep playing. Let the music speak. And so, with the help of a few dedicated students, she began recording. They borrowed microphones and set them up in the main hall after hours. The old piano she first played on, the one that changed everything, became her instrument once again. Each night she recorded a new piece, letting the echoes fill the empty room. The janitor sometimes stayed late, listening quietly from a distance, saying afterward that it felt like hearing the sound of peace itself. When the first recordings were uploaded online, no one expected what would happen next. Within days, people began sharing them everywhere. There were no flashy visuals or heavy editing, just a woman's hands moving gently across a piano and the sound of pure emotion. Listeners wrote comments saying the music helped them sleep, helped them heal, helped them remember things they had forgotten about themselves. One listener wrote, "You can tell she's lived every note." Another said, This feels like home. Lena read the messages late at night, tears quietly gathering in her eyes. She didn't play for fame or praise. She played because music was the one language that had never failed her. Yet now somehow her music was touching people far beyond her small town. Weeks turned into months, and opportunities began to appear. Invitations from other towns, offers to collaborate, even a message from a small record label that wanted to release her album. It all felt unreal. She had never chased success, and now it was gently finding its way to her. But despite the growing attention, she stayed true to her nature. When a local journalist asked her for an interview, she spoke humbly. "I'm not special," she said. "I just never stopped believing that music could speak when words couldn't. Maybe people needed to be reminded of that." The article that followed called her the quiet teacher who awakened the world's heart. Though the headline made her blush, she couldn't deny that something beautiful was happening, not just for her, but for her students, her school, and her town. Then one afternoon, something unexpected arrived in the mail, an invitation from a prestigious music festival in the city. They wanted her to perform among well-known artists in front of a large audience. For a moment, Lena just stared at the letter, unable to move. The city was far, and the stage would be huge. The thought terrified her. That evening, she confided in the head instructor. "I'm not sure I belong there," she said quietly. "I'm not trained like them anymore." He smiled kindly. "You've taught us all what true music sounds like. That's more important than any title or training. If anyone belongs there, it's you." For days, she wrestled with doubt. She thought about the laughter from that first day at the piano, about how small she had once felt. But then she remembered the faces of her students, their belief in her, and the way they played now. Not out of fear, but from love. And that gave her courage. When the day came, she traveled to the city with 2 of her students and the head instructor. The concert hall was enormous, with glittering lights and rows upon rows of seats. The other performers were professionals, dressed elegantly, speaking with confidence. Lena sat quietly backstage, her old coat folded neatly on her lap, her heart pounding like a drum. When it was her turn, she walked onto the stage. The hall fell silent as she approached the grand piano. She could feel the lights warm on her face, the eyes of hundreds of people watching. For a moment, she closed her eyes, just breathing, remembering every step of her journey, the laughter, the doubt, the nights alone at her piano, the moment she dared to play again. Then she began. The first notes were soft and tender, flowing like a whisper through the air. Slowly, the melody grew, full of warmth, sorrow, and beauty. It was not a song of triumph, but of truth. It carried the weight of years, the quiet strength of someone who had fallen and risen again. Halfway through, the hall was completely still. Even the professional musicians backstage stopped talking to listen. Some audience members had tears in their eyes without knowing why. When the final note faded into silence, Lena kept her hands on the keys for a moment, as if saying goodbye to something invisible. Then she lifted her head. The audience rose to their feet. The sound of applause filled the hall like thunder. She stood, slightly trembling, and bowed deeply. But in her heart, she wasn't thinking about applause or recognition. She was thinking about that little school, those students, and the life that had given her this second chance. After the concert, reporters tried to ask questions, but she only said a few words. "Music found me when I was lost," she said softly. "I just played it back to the world." When she returned home, the whole town celebrated her. The school organized a gathering in her honor. Students decorated the hall with flowers, and even the teachers who once doubted her came forward to thank her for reminding them why they had chosen to teach in the first place. That evening, as the sun set outside the window, she sat once more at her piano. The laughter of children echoed down the hallway, and she smiled. Life had come full circle. She touched the keys gently and began to play again. Not for an audience, not for applause, but for herself. The melody was simple, almost like a lullaby. It spoke of peace, of forgiveness, of finding beauty in ordinary things. As the last note lingered, she looked around the empty hall and whispered to herself, "This is enough." Outside, the town lights shimmered against the night sky. The woman who once sat at a piano and made teachers laugh had now made the whole world listen. Not because she shouted the loudest, but because she played from the quietest part of her heart. The months after the city concert felt like a quiet dream for Lena. The applause, the bright lights, the admiration, all of it had faded into a soft memory. She was back in her little town, living the same simple life she always had, but something deep inside her had changed. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe that her music mattered, not just to her but to others too. Every morning, she still walked the same path to the music school. The air smelled of spring flowers and the streets felt friendlier now. People recognized her when she passed by. Some waved, others smiled. A few stopped to thank her for what her music had meant to them. She didn't always know what to say. She wasn't used to attention, and part of her still felt like the woman who once cleaned halls and watched others perform from a distance. But she always smiled back, her eyes warm with quiet gratitude. At the school, the change was unmistakable. Students practiced with more passion and teachers had become gentler in their approach. Everyone seemed to understand that music wasn't just about skill, it was about feeling. Lena's presence had reminded them that talent wasn't defined by certificates or titles, but by honesty and heart. One afternoon, the school principal called her into his office. He handed her an envelope and said, "This came for you." Inside was a letter from a national music foundation. They had seen her city performance and the videos that had gone viral months before. They wanted to honor her with an award, not for fame but for contribution to the art of music education. Lena's eyes widened as she read. "An award for me?" she asked softly. The principal smiled. "You've changed lives here. You deserve it." She didn't know what to say. Awards had never been part of her dream. She only ever wanted to play and teach from the heart. Still, she accepted it quietly, promising herself that this recognition would never change who she was. That evening, when she walked home, the sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and rose. She stopped near the river bridge and leaned against the railing, watching the water flow beneath her. A group of children ran past, laughing, carrying small recorders and flutes. It made her smile. She remembered being their age, full of dreams, unaware of how hard life could sometimes be. Back home, she made herself tea and sat by her piano. The room was dim, lit only by the soft glow of a single lamp. Her hands hovered over the keys, but instead of playing right away, she just listened, to the faint sound of the night outside, to the echo of laughter in her memory, to the quietness that had become her companion. Then, slowly, she began to play. The melody that came out was unlike anything she had ever written before. It was peaceful yet strong, full of gratitude and calm. It carried traces of every moment she had lived, the laughter, the tears, the loneliness, the rediscovery. It was not a song of sorrow or triumph, but of acceptance. As she played, she thought about all the people who had touched her journey, the teachers who laughed, the students who believed, the janitor who stayed late just to listen. Each of them was part of the music now. Every note was a thank you, every pause a breath of forgiveness. She didn't realize she had tears on her cheeks until the final chord faded away. She wiped them gently and whispered, "This one's for all of us." The next morning, when she returned to the school, the students were already waiting. They greeted her with excitement and surrounded her as soon as she entered.
"We have something for you,"
they said, leading her toward the main hall. When she stepped inside, she froze. The room was decorated with flowers, candles, and a small banner that read, "Thank you for the music." The students had arranged a surprise celebration for her. Each of them had prepared a small performance, one not to impress, but to express what they had learned from her. One student played a soft tune she had composed herself. Another recited a poem about courage, and a small group sang a song in her honor. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, and that made it beautiful. As Lena listened, her heart swelled with emotion. She realized that this, not the applause, not the awards, was her true success. These young musicians were her legacy. They would carry her lessons into the world, reminding others that art was about honesty, not perfection. When the performances ended, one of the younger students handed her a small wooden box. "We made this for you," he said shyly. Inside was a simple key, the spare key to the music room. A small tag tied to it read, "For whenever you want to play." Lena smiled, her eyes shining with tears. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice trembling. "I don't deserve all this." The head instructor stepped forward. "You do," he said kindly. You gave us back what we'd forgotten, why we love music in the first place. That night, after everyone had gone home, Lena stayed behind. She sat at the piano once more, the same one that had started everything. The hall was quiet, but it felt alive, filled with the echoes of laughter, lessons, and music. She played one final piece that evening, a soft lullaby of gratitude. It drifted through the empty hallways and out into the cool night air. Someone passing outside stopped to listen for a moment, smiling without knowing who was playing. When she finished, she closed the piano lid gently and stood for a while looking around the room. Then she locked the door, placed the key in her pocket, and stepped outside. The stars above were bright. The air smelled of rain and hope. As she walked down the quiet street, her steps were slow but light, as if each one carried a rhythm of peace. In the days that followed, her story continued to spread, not as a tale of fame but as an example of how kindness and passion can change everything. Musicians, teachers, and ordinary people shared her story, the story of a woman who reminded the world that brilliance can live in the most ordinary souls. Years later, long after Lena had retired, the school still kept her piano in the main hall. No one moved it. On quiet afternoons, students would sit by it and play her pieces, whispering about how one ordinary woman had once turned laughter into inspiration. A small plaque hung above the piano. It didn't list her achievements or awards. It simply said, she played not for applause but for love. And the world listened. Every time a student read those words, they felt something stir inside, a reminder that greatness often begins in silence, with someone brave enough to sit down and play. And so her legacy lived on, not through grand stages or fame, but through hearts she had touched, forever echoing in every note that rose from that piano, every melody that began in kindness and every dream that dared to believe again.